Setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. Going to. And then, oh, redirecting to YouTube. Going to. Oh, well, we're live. But there's a 20-second delay, so I have to not watch. I have to not watch YouTube because if I watch YouTube, I'll see us being behind. So I just have to watch you from,
Zoom.
yeah, and I'll watch the chat in a separate window. Hey, Jada.
Data.
We're here to be silly, goofy time. Okay, I guess I'll just, I have to find you. Where are you? Oh, there you are. There you are. Cute. Oh, somebody just subscribed. I guess people are on the way. How you doing, bud?
Am I Bud? Air Bud?
Everybody. No, you don't have to be bud.
At least there's air. At least there's air in the sky.
At least there's air in the sky. Um, what are we doing here? Tell the people what we're doing here, because you wanted me to come on here so
Um,
bad.
so doing informal discussion doesn't have to be a long discussion. Um, but informal discussion about stuff about all the things,
All the
but
things?
all the things, but um, in particular, um, the the undercurrent of all the things.
We're gonna
And
do all that?
yeah, well, I mean, what we were talking about this morning, um, as far as, there's genocides going on, there's chemical plants blowing up, there's hurricanes doing things, um, and there's movements eating themselves from the inside out. There's people's sense of community, sense of sanity deteriorating, um, and struggling to get a grip. Um, and in your personal context, because your expertise and realm of interest is in astral therapy, psychology type things, and relationship therapy type things. Um, one of the one of the things manifesting in the mayhem is that people are looking to other people, experts or self-declared experts, to tell them how to interpret the things that are going around, the things that are going on in the world and in their personal lives. And since obviously this 18 months of eclipses are happening in mutable signs, um, and people are trying to figure out who to trust, um, or how to trust themselves, I think that, there's something there, whether it's your personal life or whether you want to talk about your personal your personal life, professional life, or you want to talk about this the vibes outside. There's stuff there. that I think is worth talking through out loud and maybe in a discussion with anybody who wants to throw in their 2 cents in chat rooms that I can't see. um, but
Oh,
but yeah, I'm I'm just inviting a discussion about what obviously what the astrology is doing, and then where all of this stuff about like people being at each other's throats accusing each other of being the wrong kind of something or the inauthentic kind of something, and then we're losing sight of the context, we're losing sight of a lot of things to the point where we're now super disorganized, um, and super dysregulated. And now we're looking to somebody to tell us how to handle all of that. And the people that we're asking to give us advice may not be the people who are, um, may not be the people who can actually help us do what we expect them to do. Um, and yeah, I don't know. Those are just overview thoughts. But I can get more specific in questions if you want me to ask you a specific question.
okay. Well, maybe backstory first. Also, hi, my name is Winter, also known as Mixed Mercury. This is my YouTube channel. I haven't gone live on it before. I usually go live on YouTube. I'm not on YouTube, on Instagram if I do anything, but I haven't done that in a long time. So I have a YouTube channel now and wanted to make use of that instead and talk about things and stuff. But I'd be shy and I'm not allowed to be shy anymore. And Emilia was like, well, we should just go on there and talk about stuff. I didn't realize we were going to talk about serious stuff. I thought
I
that
mean, we can laugh about it because I love making fun of, I love dark humor.
yeah, well, I mean, we can do whatever we want, but I thought we were going to do more like just talking about whatever. So talk about I mean we could talk about astro things. I really feel like I don't know what's going on in the sky right now because I've been in it and it's hard to talk about it when you're living it. I just moved into a new apartment, as you can see. This is my new office from what I was in before. And took that that kind of took me into a new headspace in a lot of ways. I've like been able to slow down and actually breathe and be comfortable for once, which I haven't been able to do for the last several years. Um, but the reason I wanted to call this like Astro Coaching Playtime is because sometimes I overthink. One of the things we were talking about before we started this was that I overthink what to talk about on live. Like I feel like I need to have something prepared or I need to like have something substantial to talk about. And I don't have anything prepared and I don't necessarily have anything planned. And I know Emilia just mentioned several things that we could talk about as far as like all of the stuff going on in the world. Um, but I don't have a whole lot of commentary on that in particular right now, I'll be honest. Unless there's something you want to ask me or unless there's somebody in the chat that wants to ask something. Um, but I think as far as your statement about like people are looking for somebody to help them through all of these things, whether it's processing all of these things or things going on in their personal lives or I don't know, wanting to understand the astrology of everything, that is something that I do. And I don't claim to have all of the answers about everything all the time because I don't know everything. I know the stuff that I know pretty well, but I don't know everything. I don't have the answers to everything in the world's problems. Like that's not my role per se. But I do like to process using astrology. I do like to try and like see the events happening in the world through the lens and perspective of astrology because that's what it's there for. And I'm always trying to answer the question with this work, like, why is this happening now? Like, what is it about the astro landscape that about celebrities? I don't, I'm gonna come back to that, Jada. Um, I don't know because I don't pay attention to. celebrity relationships. I really don't. So I don't have answers for that. I can answer other relationship coaching questions or just relationship questions or other questions that don't have to do with celebrities because I don't have answers about celebrities. Sorry. Um, what was I just saying?
Um, you're wanting to talk about you're wanting to talk about relationship well, you didn't say dynamics, but like relationship dynamics because you're not necessarily looking to um you're not looking to address all of the things and be an expert on all of the things, but you know,
Yeah.
is it
Yeah,
ringing a bell?
not
Okay.
looking to be the expert on everything, and I think that's where I run into a lot of trouble. So I don't mind speculating on, obviously, you guys know, I don't mind speculating on politics and world events using astrology, so we can always do that. Um, but I would also like to offer relationship advice for whoever has it, whether you have that now or if you have it another time, like if you want to meet with me about that. But something we were talking about earlier, I guess to like kind of set the stage of why we even got here was that it's hard to it's hard to mm, there's a lot of self-doubt right now, right? There's a lot of self-doubt whenever it comes to trusting ourselves and what we know. For me, for sure, trusting myself and what I know and actually sharing that with other people. It's also hard to convince anybody of what reality is right now, or like your experience, my own experience of reality, and share that with somebody else. Um, and it's just a very confusing time. So getting in some reps of just like showing up imperfectly and just starting a conversation with somebody that you know and that you care about who can hold your hand through it, or having somebody just hold space for you as you process without necessarily knowing exactly what it is that you want to say or how you feel can be really valuable, I think, in terms of just like I said, getting the reps in of just processing something. I think a lot of times I can be afraid to speak up or to say things or to initiate a conversation because I feel like I need to have all of the answers. And so by being in practice right now of rambling through my thoughts and not having something prepared and not performing, is hopefully an invitation for other people to know that they can come do that with me and that sometimes you just kind of gotta like you gotta grease the you gotta what is it? You have to what's an analogy? You have to kind of like you have to start somewhere and it doesn't have to be perfect, but the knowledge and the information and all the other things that you have will come out at some point once you begin. So this is me beginning. Gonna check on the
You
chat.
beginning.
Yeah, so I'm gonna check the chat real quick and see. Jada was talking about asking how I might coach Cardi. I don't know how I would coach Cardi, to be honest. I feel like yeah, the thing with me and celebrities is I really don't be in celebrity drama that much. But as far as like what kind of questions I would answer, what's fun for me, um, what's fun for me is people asking relationship questions, literally any relationship question that you have or like topic that you see on the timeline. I've seen stuff about polyamory going around. I've seen stuff about monogamy going around. I've seen stuff about cheating. I've seen stuff, and it's talking about Cardi. Seen stuff about cheating. I've seen stuff about anxious and avoidant attachment. Like that's the stuff that I feel like I'm great at. Something Emilia mentioned earlier was people blowing up movements, like organizing movements or activism movements, and where we go wrong, like with sharing our messages or communicating with each other. or ways that people can be petty online and blow up other people's spot unnecessarily instead of, I don't know, taking accountability for their own actions and looking in the mirror. And instead, a lot of times people will posture a certain way and then try to make everybody else look bad or point the finger at somebody else so much that it takes the attention off of them. So plenty of different things like that I feel like would be a little bit easier to start with. And then if we get into bigger stuff from there, that'd be cool. So Emily,
And then
since you're here with me,
um, I'll also just point out the fact that the only fire in the sky is the moon in Leo.
yeah.
Um, and that when, I don't know, whatever is these aspects and dynamics to fire signs when you've got a bunch of mutable stuff going on, is that people, if people are either experiencing self-doubt or other people's perceptions of them is like generating, some level of self-interrogation that doesn't feel all that comfortable, people will lean into, well, some people will lean into like puffing up their chest and being a little bit louder and more arrogant or whatever, in the way that they respond to that, because it's uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so just pointing that out, that like having some having having a constructive amount of self-doubt, self-reflection is the thing that is supposed to make you feel more curious about the experience that other people are having. Hopefully, if they're actually, caring, safe people. Um, and then you'll learn and grow somewhere in there. But maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just be a bigger dick than everybody else. And that might work for whatever your definition of work is, whatever you wanted to get out of that, but it's probably not going to be a more robust and caring community, honestly. So, um, anyway, just throwing that out there, that in terms of the balance of elements in the sky, like, um, we've got very little fire.
That's a good point, actually. I didn't wasn't thinking about that until you mentioned it, but I feel like, yeah, literally the sky is mostly air right now. And so there can be a lot of introspection that comes with that, which is cool. There can also be a lot of yapping that comes with that, but it's a little bit different than it's that the yapping, the air yapping is a little bit different than the fire yapping. I feel like the fire yapping is really like trying to get people moving. It's trying to like instigate some shit. It's fire. It's like you get burned by fire. It's activating, it's engaging, but air is a little bit more contemplative, I think, or a little bit more sharing like perspective or broadening perspective sometimes. So I think that approach is probably a little bit more where I'm at. I feel very like inside my own head. And so verbalizing that out loud with somebody else feels really vulnerable. And then the whole like moon being in Leo in particular, especially opposite Saturn right now, is like, I actually don't want people to see my process. I feel like that's really embarrassing. I feel like it's embarrassing to not have all of the bravado and the confidence and the hubris that I would normally have. That looks like, hey, look at me, I'm competent, I know what I'm talking about, and to just come out here and ramble without a plan, especially with another person. But at
But
the
it's the
same
fact
time,
that, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say at the same time, it is authentic. Like I'm actually not a person who always has it together and always knows what to say. And in fact, I procrastinate a lot, even whenever I'm, gonna do a full moon party or a lecture or whatever it is. Um, there's usually a lot of posturing that goes on while I'm doing that. And it takes a lot of energy to do that, a lot of masking to do that. That I don't want to do, and that I can't do anymore, to be honest. I'm burnt out. So why not just unmask a little bit and see what happens from there? What were you gonna say? And then I want to go to the chat.
Yeah, just that the posturing, the the overconfidence, the, you know, the hubris and whatever all the vocab words that you were using. All
I got
of
a lot of
that,
those.
all the um fire sign uh characteristics. Those are the things that like will do the ironic thing of like isolating you further from people sometimes, or like from the from the approval or validation that you're expecting other people to have, or that you're wanting to get from other people. And so I don't know, I think that that's at least like one of the flavors of fuckery that is happening. I mean, I'm like my position, I'm not a psychologist nerd or anything like that. I'm not a therapy person. I'm my position um and my experience of the sky vibes is totally different. But and the thing at the forefront of my mind is, you know, community dynamics, movement, activists, whatever type circles, and watching this thing play out where like people want to just people people everywhere as human beings are craving connections, are craving like to be seen and heard and have their experiences validated and be held in all these ways. And then a lot of times like the person with the biggest, like the person throwing their weight around in the fiery fucking ways is the one who's like hurting the cause, hurting the cause the most. Like you don't need to bully your way into like making the environment change. Like the environment is going to change if you're going to do that, and it's not going to change in the way that you want it to, or the way that's going to like bring people together. And so I don't know, there's a way to steward in a disciplined way the element of fire, and we're being abusive with fire in a lot of the time. And so how do we how do you, how do we leverage the mutable things right now or whatever else is going on in the sky to make um to make us more aware of our impact so that we can actually have the impact that we want to have, instead of just shouting all the time about who's right and who's wrong and who's better than who.
Ooh, that's a good question. So you're asking basically how can, as far as like community building and organizing, and really it sounds like communicating your truth or your experience or your message to other people in a way that has impact without burning people. Like, how do you go about that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it was not a question that you need to answer personally unless you have some just thoughts and commentary, but it's just one of the dynamics where we want to have an impact, like, you know, people anywhere, whatever the flavor of impact that they want to have. Like people want to have an impact, people want, to have other people be affected by them, and the world to change in ways that feel more supportive than unsupportive. And yet, like the world the world is falling apart. Empires are crumbling, global warming is happening. Um, and yet we still somehow manage to be so damaging to each other. And yeah, I don't know, like, I mean, where, the eclipses right now, where the themes of like self-trust and, you know, taking things, whether you're taking things at face value or you're digging a little bit deeper, like how, like we're gearing up for fucking Saturn and Pisces, and I don't. It's not cute. It's not pretty. And so, in the way that people are seem to be leaning more, the majority, the trend seems to be that in the midst of like a self-reflection, self-knowing crisis, on top of every other crisis, like we're looking to people who are actually like puffing up their chest to look like they have the fucking answers because they want to feel needed or they want to feel, you know, smart and whatever. And so now we're looking to the wrong leadership, or we're looking to the wrong, like, you know, experts or self-appointed leaders or self-appointed whoever's, because we want to have a sense of control over the situation, and then it's going to set us up to like believe people who are like taking taking this like opportunistic moment, um and you know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to
Yeah.
say that like we're setting ourselves up to to believe something external to us, um and it's just not gonna be cute when Saturn enters Pisces and we've we've gotten ourselves into a pattern, or a dynamic where um what is that called? Where we're I can't think of the vocab word. The what is the what's that thing where you have a call center in another country?
Wait, where you have a what?
Where you have a call center in another country, offering
Outsourcing?
jobs.
Oh.
Yes, outsourcing.
Oh. I was like, I don't
So
know what you're talking about, dude.
we're outsourcing our like
Oh,
faculties
yes.
for discernment to an authority figure that may or may not actually have a fucking authority, because authority is not
Yeah.
self-appointed. Authority is not even how many followers you have. Like authority is not like, you got your nepo baby, like, you know benefits, and now you've got a podium. Like it's not authority, like, so I'm trying to my mind is going in different directions, but I'm like, okay, like Leo with authority, and like we're trying to outsource our sense of self, our sense of identity. We're outsourcing our mechanisms for trust to whoever has the perceived authority. And now, so either we don't believe anything at all because everything is a this is all a simulation, or we only believe people who are in positions of power that we can benefit from because everything else is crumbling. And so how are we going to find a way to survive except by clinging and cleaving to um the things that are actually just taking advantage of us.
Yeah. So the mutable part. So really what I'm thinking about as you're talking is like we want to be believed. I think the central theme of a lot of the stuff going on right now and all these conflicting ideas and beliefs is that people want their experience or their perception or whatever it is of reality to be validated and believed by the people they're in relationship with. And whenever those beliefs are conflicting, especially right now, um, then it turns into a competition. So now it's like, okay, in order to be believed, like what do I need to do? How do I impose my beliefs on other people or out in the world in a way that people are going to um actually like take me seriously? Because when we're talking about especially like Mercury ruled signs, Gemini and Virgo, people really struggle with being believed and taken seriously. And so it does. It turns into a lot of condescension. It turns into a lot of patronizing. It turns into a lot of, well, you're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not qualified to talk about this. Like, I'm qualified to talk about this, and nobody knows better than me. And then, in general, the distrust of everything and everyone makes it so that even when someone does try to tell you the truth, you refuse to believe it or you're really skeptical of it. And that skepticism is only going to increase over the next 3 years when Saturn enters Pisces. It's going to be a lot of somebody saying one thing and you hearing the information and it probably not landing on you in a way that feels like, yeah, that's probably true. It's going to be a lot of, but why should I believe you? And I've actually seen that particular question come up a lot. I tweeted something recently about um, there was some vaccine discourse going on, vaccine versus the actual virus discourse going on. And lots of people in the comments, I mean, this thing, it got like it probably has 2.5 million views at this point. So the discourse was going off in the chat, and so much of it was, anti-vaxxers coming from everywhere, people who maybe are not anti-vax but don't believe that COVID is that bad everywhere. And then COVID cautious people and everyone with all of their different opinions based on their personal experience and anecdotes of what's going on. So, um, at the heart of a lot of it, it's like you can hear what someone is saying, what they're sharing, and their personal experience, what they've seen up front, and then the other person be like, well, why should I believe you? And then a lot of the things that people will go to are like, well, what are your credentials? What have you studied? What's your background? Like, how do I know that you're telling the truth? So if we talk about this in relationships, then um, something that I tend to see a lot whenever it comes to like, why should I trust you? Or just trust issues, we'll say, in relationships or issues of being heard and seen and understood. Like, I would say the desire is usually to be seen and understood, but the apprehension around that, especially for people with mutable signs, is that a lot of times we won't speak up or we won't say how we actually feel because we don't think the other person will believe us or take us seriously or that it'll even be received in a way. So we'll fall all over ourselves about how we present the information or the story that we tell and how much context we provide before just saying like, hey, this thing made me feel this way, like XYZ incident. Let's say, for example, um, let's say, Emilia, you and I are in a fight because you stepped on my toe. You stepped on my.
Can it be something more interesting?
Okay, pick what's something more interesting. I don't know. That's the first thing that came to my head.
Um,
And then I'll answer your
I
question in the chat next, Jada.
oh, okay, yeah. I unplugged your favorite TV show.
You unplugged my favorite TV show. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, let's do, okay, I'm gonna refine that again and say like you okay, let's say that you like threw out my gaming system, my like PlayStation. You threw it out and you didn't tell me. This is not something they would ever do, by the way. So let's say I come home and Emilia has thrown out my PlayStation, and then I'll be like, why in the fuck did you throw out my PlayStation? And then you would tell me why you did that. Because I would actually like to know why did you throw out my PlayStation and not tell me?
I threw it out because um I threw it out because um I had a dream. And
It's always a Pisces with a dream.
I had a dream and it needed to go.
It needed to go.
I had a dream that the PlayStation strangled me in my sleep and you didn't wake up when I called you for help.
Okay.
It was
That's
time
so
for it to go.
absurd. I'm gonna pretend like this is a real thing that would happen because something that I do actually know about Emily is that they don't like whenever I'm playing video games, and we're like on the phone or something, they really don't like that. So I'm going to just go with the fact that they don't like that because they've had this dream, this recurring dream multiple times that the PlayStation grew arms and legs and strangled them in their sleep and I did nothing to protect them. So they threw out my PlayStation. So I'm gonna come home and be like, okay, why? Like, I need to understand more about why. Well, okay, one thing I could do is actually just blow up on Emilia and say, like, that's ridiculous. That dream that you had is not even real life. The fact that you think that something like this could actually happen is ridiculous. And I don't know why you thought it made sense for you to just throw out my PlayStation instead of, I don't know, letting me know first or telling me why this is such a big deal to you.
You calling me crazy? You
Yeah,
calling me stupid?
like you're crazy. You're
Why?
stupid. Throw out a whole bunch of other ableist terms to criticize your perspective when what I could actually do is be like, okay, it really it really upsets me that you threw out my PlayStation without talking to me first. Like what's going on? Can I understand why you did this? And then you would tell me, and then you would explain to me your dream. This is probably not the best example.
I stepped on your foot because
Okay, never
so
mind. I'm
you're
gonna get off of this subject. I can't think of a good example, but basically, like, my point is a lot of times couples will get into arguments about stuff, or friends will get into arguments about stuff because they have different perspectives on the actual event that happened. And so they're trying to each convey their perspective of why they did what they did, or convey their perspective of their experience of what happened between the two of them. And then usually the conflict is in how both people perceived the event more than like the truth of the situation itself. Like, if we go with the silly PlayStation example, I see it as Emilia threw out this thing that I really care about and just didn't care about how that would make me feel. But to them, they're saying like, no, this thing actually really hurt me and I didn't want it in the house anymore. So I took the initiative to just get rid of this thing. And so what really could happen is both of us like have a conversation about why this thing bothers them so much, and then come to some kind of like consensus around how to handle the situation, hear each other's perspective out, and then move from there. But that example, is a little bit probably not the best way to describe.
I mean, that's a more absurd example.
Right. But yeah, the thing is, the intention was not to hurt me. The intention was for them to protect themselves. But I'm seeing it as like a personal attack. And so then we would be in this fight over me taking something personally that they did, when really it probably wasn't actually about me, other than the part of the conversation where I did nothing to protect them. But that would be another conversation for,
Yeah, because why aren't you a mind reader?
yeah, why am I not reading your mind that what you actually needed was for me to um protect you in the first place, or something like that.
Or
So
pay attention to me.
yeah, or pay more attention to you instead of spending so much time playing video games, right? So anyway, I'm gonna attempt to answer Jada's question because me coming up with an example off the top of my head didn't go so well, but that's okay. Um, Question was, what do you think about that tweet that people keep sharing that says, "You're not poly, you just need two people to love you at once like your parents didn't"? I have seen this tweet come up a lot of times before, and I think that
Is there
there's a
also,
hmm?
and then also the counter of you're not monogamous?
Yeah, yeah, I'll come back to that part, but I think the funny thing about conversations around polyamory is that people assume that there's, or people have decided, rather, our culture especially has decided that there's one way, one correct way to do relationships, and it looks like man marries a woman and pops out 2.5 kids, has a dog and a picket fence, and that's the proper American way to have relationships. But then if you go to other places in the world, it's actually more common to maybe have, if not more than one partner, maybe you have like intergenerational um people living in the home with you, or you just can do relationship in so many different ways. And I do know in some other countries and even some other religions, it's actually common for at least one person in the relationship to have multiple partners, usually the man, which different topic. But the question itself, or the statement itself of saying like you're not poly, you just need both people to love you, like you needed your parents to. The assumption that polyamory is not like a natural way to do relationships, and so you're just trying to compensate for this wounding that happened to you from your parents whenever you were little by having multiple partners. One is really insulting, but two, it's also just not true. And so the counter response that someone posted that was really good that Emilia was mentioning was that, um, let me know if I'm getting this wrong, but it's like, you're not actually monogamous. You just have control issues and hate the idea of a partner loving somebody besides just you at one time because you want to possess that person, or you want to have total certainty that this person loves you and only you so that you can feel secure. And then I think the end result was still because both of your parents didn't love you or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
what
it
it
was
was?
more so, it was. I mean, it was specifically framed around abandonment. Like you're not monogamous, you just have like really deep abandonment wounds, and so you think that by controlling this one person and making sure that they stay with you, that it's going to do something.
Yeah. Okay, that's what it was. Um, yes. So what's interesting about both of these takes is that they bring up wounding experiences that happen in relationships as a reason why somebody might want to be monogamous or polyamorous. Personally, I think you can do relationships literally however you want. There's no blueprint for what a correct relationship looks like. So, for me, and the way that I do coaching, especially, you do relationships in the way that you and the people you're in relationship with agree on. So, if everybody's on the same page, everybody's a consenting adult, and everyone is communicating what they are and aren't comfortable with, you can literally do a relationship however you want. You can have multiple partners if that's what makes sense to you. You can have one person has multiple partners and one person doesn't if they don't want multiple partners. Um, you can be in situationships for the rest of your life if that's what makes you comfortable. You can do solo. I think that's called solo polyamory or something like that. Or where basically like you're in relationship with yourself and then you have other relationships kind of less exclusively, or the level of commitment is more so with yourself. I'm not fully sure about that, but point being, um the way people orient towards relationships, like you do have choice over that. You don't have to necessarily follow this strict blueprint of only doing relationship in the way that you've always seen it. Um, what's interesting to me about, we'll say for the polyamory question of like, you don't need multiple partners, you just want multiple people to love you the way that your parents did. Um, and like attachment wounds. Like people love to talk about attachment styles, but not necessarily attachment theory. Um, and attachment theory, at least the way that I understand it, is a little bit different, a little bit more nuanced and complex than just attachment styles. The attachment styles we usually hear about being anxious or avoidant or secure, those are like three super duper broad, very nuanced boxes that we really use those terms for. We really use those terms as a way to simplify, um, to just simplify and talk about two different ways of relating. And usually one way of relating is a little bit more avoidant, which a term that we used in my course was actually like islands. Islands are people who maybe prefer a little bit more time to themselves. They can be a little bit more introverted sometimes, usually conflict avoidant, like would rather not engage in conflict, or would rather not pursue conflict. I've also heard these two styles described as like, what is it? Like pursuer. I can't remember the other word, but either way, waves and islands was how they described it in my course. And islands, like I said, people who um, prefer to keep things a little bit more like chill and calm and maybe keep to themselves a little bit more. And waves are the type who tend to be a little bit more on the anxious side of the spectrum, right? These things can bleed into each other. But the anxious types, they tend to kind of come and go. There's a lot of like a come and go, a little bit more volatile sometimes. Volatile is not a good word, but a little bit more variable, I guess, with their emotional states, and usually a little bit more expressive, external with the way that they express themselves and their emotions in relationships. So when you have two people who do relationship or who do relating in these two opposing ways, um, usually we have like in two-person relationships, we can get this pursuer avoider dynamic thing going on where one person wants to fix and solve whatever conflicts are going on. and make everything okay and like deal with it up front. And then people who need a little bit more time to process and who like to take things a little bit slower, who need more space, stuff like that. So, depending on how you were raised in your household and like the culture of doing conflict in your upbringing, like depending on how conflict was handled when you were really, really young, your nervous system is kind of wired or tuned in to deal with conflict the way that you experienced it growing up. So if you on the island side had parents who would maybe not actually address or talk about or confront whatever conflict was going on, but would instead maybe um have conflict with you as a child and not maybe not deal with everything up front. Maybe they send you to your room to think about, whatever was going on, or you had to process a lot of things alone, then you might be more of the island type where you just would rather take space, process internally, and then return later when things have cooled down. Whereas if you grew up with parents who were very loud and maybe a lot more combative, or who wanted to get things all out in the open, but not necessarily like hear you out, maybe they're putting you on the defense a lot, or maybe they were very defensive, or you just didn't know what you were going to get. It was kind of unpredictable what you were going to get from your parents, then you might be a little bit more of the anxious type or the wave type where you would rather settle things as fast as possible so that you're not having to deal with all of the possible like conflicts that so you don't have to deal with ongoing conflict basically. But also you're probably searching for a little bit more predictability. So these two people often find each other, right, in relationships. And basically my point of sharing all of this is that when people are talking about you just need people to love you the way that your parents loved you, like your nervous system is probably searching for some kind of familiarity in your relationships, and the way that you do conflict can represent or like mirror back a lot of that familiarity. um so in a monogamous relationship, like usually you're recreating dynamics that you grew up around, usually not always, but um there's a part of us that wants to confront, or rather resolve, the dynamics that you experience growing up, and you do that through your partner. So if you're more of the island type who is an internal processor and who likes to figure things out on your own, you're probably going to attract or are attracted to waves, not because of some weird like not because you're attracting that person for no particular reason, but you're trying to learn or evolve that part of yourself through being in relationship with this other person. And so one cool thing, just staying on topic of polyamory, one cool thing about polyamory is that you do get to explore different parts of yourself, or different partners can bring out different parts of yourself, depending on, their attachment styles and their nervous system and their way of doing conflict and all that type of stuff. Um, or in a monogamous relationship, you're probably attracted to somebody who mirrors you in a lot of ways. But in both relationships, you're going to discover different things about yourself so long as you're staying curious and open about yourself and your partner. So I don't know. I always think the polyamory versus monogamy discourse is interesting because people think that one way of doing relationship is going to solve all of their relationship problems. And it's not, because the common denominator between you being in a poly relationship or a monogamous relationship is that you're the person in it. You're bringing your relational history and background with you into that relationship. So, yeah, if you have insecurities around, not feeling like enough or not feeling worthy of the love and affection that you desire, or if you feel like you're too much for people, or um, people always leave, or whatever narrative you bring into your relationship, it doesn't matter if you got five partners or if you got one, you're going to have to confront those stories and those demons, if you will, in order to navigate any particular relationship. So, long-winded answer. Um, but Yeah, I usually don't engage in that type of discourse because sometimes I do though. If I have something to say, I'll get into it, but I just think there's no one way, no correct way to do relationships. It really depends on the people who are in it. So yeah. Um, Something I was gonna say about like this idea of community, because we talk about that a lot too. And Emily, I know that was something that you initially brought up of like, how can we effectively build relationships at a time where a lot of us don't trust each other and also aren't really willing to listen to people who maybe have differing perspectives than us. I'm not having very much openness to people who see things differently than we do. I think that's something we're really going to struggle with for a while. I think the pandemic, especially, and all that has come with it, whether that's Trump and now Kamala and even Jill Stein and third party Green Party type stuff, politically, but also, um, like I was saying before, anti-vax versus COVID cautious versus masking versus not masking, and all of the other ways that we've been polarized and really divided over the last several years, has really driven what feels like an insurmountable wedge and trench between all of us. That the minute somebody says even a word that might sound like they're speaking on a talking point of a group that we see as opposite from us, our brains like shut down immediately and we don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear anything we've that they have to say. We've already dismissed their perspective and um their experience or even their indoctrination, if you want to say that, and why they might feel or think the way that they think. And it's controversial, but I feel like in order for us to make any progress, at some point we do somehow, in whatever type of environment makes sense, we do have to get to a point where we're better listeners. Like nobody on either side of any divisive argument is going to collaborate with you, or at the very least like get along with you diplomatically if you aren't willing to hear their side or their perspective. And so something that we learn a lot, that we learned in my course, that has really like changed my life but hasn't made me have to abandon my convictions, which I think is really important for me, especially as a Gemini rising person, is a technique, if you will, called listen for understanding, or listen until they feel understood. And so this is something I use a lot for relationship coaching, but especially for that would be like really useful for community building. Um, Listen for understanding just means that instead of you imposing your thoughts, your beliefs, your narratives, whatever it is, on the conversation, you're really listening and asking questions and empathizing to an extent, really putting yourself in the other person's shoes, purely just to understand what they're saying, why they're saying it, and where they're coming from. And it's not to say that you agree, it's not to say that you um, even necessarily believe what they're saying, or that you even can empathize with it. It's just, it's almost like purely logical of hearing what they have to say and saying, okay, I can see why you would say that. I can see where you're coming from. I understand why you would feel that way. Yeah, it really sounds like you think that XYZ thing is happening and therefore this is your response. And that makes sense to you. Just that alone. And if you can do that in a way that it just lets the other person feel understood by you and them confirming that they feel understood by you, their guard immediately goes down. They're now more receptive to what you have to say. But that's really hard to do, especially if, let's say, a fucking Zionist is trying to convince you that they really do believe that, you know, Israel deserves to have a homeland or whatever the fuck. Like, that justifies all of the violence is going on. Like that's not something that at least most of my followers, most people who hang out on this side of the spectrum like want to hear. So it can be really challenging in situations like that where you're dealing with somebody who is absolutely totally deeply opposite from you. But again, the purpose of listening for understanding is not to like become best friends at the end or to adopt somebody else's belief or somebody else's narrative as your truth. It's simply just to understand their truth and then have them be more receptive to you to what you have to say because you've actually received what they've had to say first. So this comes in really handy, especially in like close relationships, um, friendships, family relationships, partnerships, whatever it is, but especially in community building where you're dealing with a lot of different perspectives at once and you're all working towards a common goal. Like it definitely is a lot easier if you're working towards a common goal to take in what the other person is having to, what the other person is saying or sharing with you and actually applying it in a way that considers them and considers their perspective and where they're coming from. But that doesn't work if we're sitting over here on our high horse and inflated ego saying that the way that I want to do things or the way that I see things is the only way that things can be. This is the only way this thing can be done. This is the only answer. Um, but yeah, I feel like we have to teach people how to be better listeners before we can ever really be in coalition or relationship or any kind of diplomatic dynamic with somebody else. Thinking about that as Venus is in Libra right now with Mars and Gemini and Saturn and Aquarius all being air signs. And something that Samaje said earlier that I thought was helpful was questioning your own thoughts. Because it's not a bad thing to question your own thoughts or even to decenter yourself for a moment just to listen to a perspective different than yours. But it can feel very challenging and it can also feel very confronting if you are the type of person who is easily swayed or who self abandons in order to empathize with somebody else. It's very hard to hold on to your perspective and somebody else's perspective at the same time if you're the type of person who has never been allowed to really be convicted about your truth or your story or whatever it is. So I'm curious what y'all think about that. Let me know in the chat. If you have any questions about that or scenarios around listening for understanding or anything that I've mentioned so far, community, polyamory relationships, anything like that, I'm curious your thoughts. And Emilia, I'm also curious about your thoughts, even though I'm pretty sure you're eating off camera right now.
No, um I was eating, but it wasn't very good. So
Oh,
I stopped.
sorry.
Um it was, yeah, disappointing. Um I'm not sure if I'm having any coherent thoughts at the moment. I think mostly I have laments, um, which there's enough lamenting on the internet. Um, but just in general, like it's it seems to me like a pretty straightforward concept that everybody in a given community does not need to be all best friends, does not
Right.
all need to like each other. I mean, the idea that we would have a million people on one island and everybody is best friends frolicking in the fucking yard is not doesn't make any sense. Um, but at the bare minimum, like let us not make life harder for one another. And or at bare minimum, like let's not make, the work that we're trying to accomplish harder for one another, especially if we already agree on some basic things like clean water or whatever other rhetorics that we have. But I don't know, you can't even get people to have an uncomfortable conversation without, I don't know, without completely losing the plot immediately. Or people have critiques of this person or the next, and they've got critiques for days, they've got dissertations for days, but they don't have any time or energy or capacity to actually talk to the person you're mad at. Like that's
Yeah.
like if you're not there, then you're not there. But like let's let's refrain from sowing more dissension and unrest amongst people who amongst the rest of the world, all because
Amongst
you're
people who are
not where
doing their best.
who are doing their best, or people who have nothing to do with like, you know, whatever issue comes up, whatever issue of the week. Um, and I don't know what it's gonna take because social media has given a lot of people the ability to be really wrong and really loud. Um, and like feed off of that addiction to drama. Um,
Yeah,
because
real.
we can we get to feel really powerful for a minute on our phones, um, by you know by attacking each other because it's a lot easier than getting power over the military overlords. And I just don't I don't understand. Like we already know it's gonna be hard. It's hard already. It's gonna be hard. Things are hard. Living is hard. Like casting off empires is hard. Surviving climate change is hard. And so why would we choose an easy thing to do that also just so happens to be the most damaging antisocial thing we can do because it's easy? Like,
And by that you mean like just bitching at each other online?
yeah. Um, and sometimes bitching, I mean, we're also passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, okay, well, you had a lot to say on the internet, but now that I ran into you at this, at this, at the function, now all of a sudden it's either you don't see me now all of a sudden, or or it's like kissy face, like I didn't just hear all that shit you were talking.
Yeah.
And it's like why do we want to live in this dysfunction? Like why do we think that being this conflict avoidant is going to get us anywhere that we haven't already been?
I mean it's a good point like the I do think in general we've all become a lot more avoidant and passive aggressive, especially online because you can say something to somebody indirectly or get that, you can get your tweets off, get your shit off online, and then in real life, it's a different story. Um, and there's a real reason for that, right? Like whenever you're arguing with your phone, you're not arguing with a when you're arguing on your phone, you're not arguing with a real person whose nervous system you can actually feel rebounding and interacting with yours like you can in real life. And if you were to say some shit like that to somebody in real life, you get popped in the mouth or, like something, it would escalate in a way that could be really dangerous very quickly. And so, of course, you don't behave that way in real life, but that's also like a testament to the importance of dealing with things, like the importance of dealing with people, I should say, offline, actually going out and talking to people and having conversations with people and dealing with people's humanity instead of their avatar and screen name, on whatever social media site where you can just say anything and get all of this hype and these likes and this backup around an idea rather than actually engaging with people's humanity. I think it would be a lot different. It is a lot different in person. So, um speaking of Saturn and Pisces too, there's definitely going to be that like elephant in the room feeling a lot of people feeling really disturbed, we'll say, or affected by something, but nobody actually using the words and the language to talk about it, of course, until Jupiter enters Gemini. And then who knows what that square is going to be like. But I do think this Mars retrograde right now, Mars and Gemini, between Gemini and Cancer, is kind of planting the seeds for what a lot of that will be. Because there is a lot of people being aggressive with their language right now, but probably not actually saying what it is that they really mean or how they really feel, which is I feel helpless, I feel powerlessness, and I feel abandoned. Like imagine how different our conversations would be if we actually led with that instead of just straight up attacking other people and shitting on them and calling them names for sharing their experience, which like experience is subjective. There is no one truth. There is no real quote reality because we tell stories based on what we saw, and a lot of our stories are based on things that we've experienced long before that one incident ever happened, and that kind of fills in the gaps. Um, that's usually what we're reacting to in the moment rather than the situation itself. So it can get really complicated and really distorted very quickly. Samaje asked a question. Um, they said, "What advice would you give when dealing with passive aggression in relationships from both people?" I assume by both people you mean in both sides of the relationship. So let's talk
Tell them
about
off.
what'd you say?
I said, tell them off. At the core.
So this is a good question. I want to actually think about this for a second instead of just rattling something off because I've definitely been passive aggressive in relationships before. Um,
I've
and
never been passive aggressive in a relationship my entire life. I'm the
yeah,
best.
okay. No, not at all. Never. What is passive aggression? Maybe let's define that first. Passive aggression is when you say things that you don't mean, or whenever you dance around the thing in question, whether that's your feelings or a particular offense between the two of you, or you're not directly addressing or confronting something that's bothering you. And so instead, you act out in these indirect ways. Acting out can be, hold on, I just got a message. Okay. Um, so yeah, acting out in response to an issue that you have with another person, but not actually addressing the issue itself. We'll go with that. So why would people do this? Well, let's go back to attachment theory, right? Um, if you grew up in a household where the big people in your life, whoever it was that was taking care of you, never modeled what it looked like to say, "Hey, can we talk about that issue that we were having earlier? Like, can we talk about what happened? Can I share the impact that this experience had on me?" Um, you know, if you weren't raised in a house where you could actually go to your parents or your caregivers or whoever it was and say, like, "Hey, this really hurt my feelings. This didn't feel good whenever you did this. I didn't really like when XYZ said this to me," right? Like if you weren't ever able to just come out and say how you were affected or impacted by a situation that you experience, whether that's directly from your caregivers or from someone else, um, you learn that it's not safe for you to do that. And again, that becomes imprinted in your nervous system, where the minute that something happens, some kind of conflict or rupture happens between you and another person, your body is always going to remember the fact that you were never able to bring that issue to somebody in a healthy and constructive way that would have alleviated that charge that you feel in your nervous system whenever somebody upsets you or when you're in conflict with somebody. Because you know how whenever somebody pisses you off and like your heart races, you get tense, you get angry, you you know, feel really sweaty or, whatever it is, you have a physiological response to being harmed in some kind of a way. If you're not able to bring that to somebody in a constructive way where they help you to relieve that stress, your body is always going to remember that feeling that you got whenever you were hurt and whenever you tried to share it with somebody and it wasn't well received. Because it could either be that somebody ignored you or dismissed you or downplayed the issue or got mad at you for saying that you felt upset about something, right? So, all of these different ways that your body can register, oh, it's actually not safe for me to tell somebody how I feel. You get older, you're an adult, you're in a relationship with people who are not at all related to those early life experiences. And now you feel like the minute somebody does you wrong, something as simple as they ate your leftovers in the fridge, and now you feel like you can't go to your roommate and say, hey, I really don't like that you ate my leftovers in the fridge, because your mind is now going to immediately tell a story that says, it doesn't matter what I say or what I do, this person is not going to be moved by the fact that this thing hurt my feelings, or the way that this person is going to respond to me is not actually going to alleviate my pain or my stress or my hurt. And so I'm actually just not going to bring it up at all. So that's how avoidance is born. And whenever you can't just come out and say how you're feeling about something, that's where passive aggression comes from, because you still have all this pent up frustration, hurt, anger, whatever it is that you need somebody to witness, somebody to respond to, somebody to care about or to be moved by, but you're holding it all in. And so instead, you start acting out in these other ways because you need to get that out somehow. Um, but you don't trust that the other person is actually going to give a shit. So how the question, I guess, then becomes, how do you build the trust and the security that you can actually approach the other person in the relationship with an issue that you have and them actually respond to it and things change so that you're not having to hold on to all of this hurt or resentment or whatever it is forever and ever. Amen. So how do you deal with that? Well, um, one, you definitely have to get both parties on board to be willing to learn how to address conflict as close to the moment of the offense as possible. Because the thing with passive aggression and resentment and hurt and all of these things is that if a situation happens on Sunday and you wait until next Sunday to address it, there was probably something that happened on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday that is now piled on top of the original offense that you're going to get to Sunday. Something happens, you blow up, all of these different things spill out, and now you're arguing about who knows what, several different things, and both of you can't get on the same page about what you're even fighting about. So the sooner you can address the issue, the better. That's the first step. It's not the first step, but that's like making it a priority between the two of you to address something the minute that it happens, no matter how small it is. And having that agreement between the two of you, that'll go a long way. Now, how do you establish, let's say, the trust and the safety that you can even bring something up in the moment? Again, agreements in relationships, I think agreements in relationships like before things happen, um, are really underrated. Uh, Having some kind of foundation in place where you say, like, when things are good, when you say like, hey, when you have an issue with me, um can you please let me know? And if you can come up with some kind of a language, now this would be something I would prefer to coach people on individually, because each individual, is going to have a different conflict style that they're working with and where they're coming from, but in general, like, agreed upon language between the two of you goes a long way. So for example, if you know that it's easier for you to get your thoughts out maybe in writing or through text or whatever it is, like, do that. Do that for yourself first to get your thoughts out, to say whatever it is that's bothering you. And then if you have agreed upon language between both of you that says, like, okay, when we have a conflict with each other, let's do it this way. First, I'll listen to you and I'll hear your side of the perspective and I'll listen, I'll ask questions. I'll do that listening for understanding that I was talking about earlier on your behalf, and I'll listen until you feel understood by me. Then we can switch. Or, you do the validating things first of like, I understand where you're coming from. I see why this hurt you. I see why this made you feel bad. Or, I could understand why this would make you feel this way. Um, Starting with that type of back and forth, and then having the agreement that you're going to switch so that the other person can then share their perspective and you listen or whatever it is, right? That you both have the opportunity to speak your piece and be heard and be validated in where you're coming from. Um, that's a good foundation to have for any argument that you're going to have. There also needs to be an agreement that you'll own some aspect of your part in whatever the dynamic is. And that's usually the most difficult part because we don't want to be the bad guy. We don't want to be the person who hurts somebody else. Nobody wants to harm their partners, right? Which is usually the reason people get defensive in the first place. Nobody wants to admit that they might have done harm or to accept that they might have done harm, even if they didn't intend to. So there also has to be some kind of agreement that says, if you tell me something hurt, I trust that that actually hurt you. And I can take some responsibility for my actions in that case of just saying like, yes, I did do that and I see how that hurt you. That's not something that would have hurt me. That might be how you're feeling or whatever. All of that's besides the point, but you have to create the container of safety that you can even bring something up to someone in the first place. Um, Otherwise the pattern of passive aggressiveness will still linger in the relationship. Um, so let me gather my thoughts for a second. Um, Creating the container of safety and an agreement of how you're going to do conflict, and then the way that you actually communicate when somebody has hurt you is really, really important. Because if you lead with language that is attacking or blaming or shaming the other person, um, or that's condescending or villainizing or whatever it is, the other person's immediately going to go on the defense because now you're attacking their character or their personhood. And that's not really necessary for you to convey your point. Um, to let one of the more effective ways I've learned to let someone know that you've hurt them is to say, when you did this or when this thing happened, I felt. And you ideally want to use a feeling word. So when you ate my leftovers from the fridge, um, I felt, I'm thinking of the word, what's a word for like, I felt like you didn't care about me, or I felt like you, um, not unconsidered. I don't know. It would be something like that, right? I felt like, um, I don't know. I felt disrespected, whatever it is, whatever feeling word, right? And the other person needs to be able to receive that and say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is, um, you felt disrespected whenever I ate your leftovers. It's like that simple, right? I can see how, or, you might ask a question, why was that disrespectful to you? Like, what about that felt disrespectful? And then they explain, well, it felt like you just didn't consider that, you didn't consider me. You didn't consider that, I might have saved that for another time. I'm going to be really busy this week. I won't have time to make lunch. And so I saved that for me to take to work with me the next day. And when you ate it, it really created so many more things that now I'm gonna have to go and do and da 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 da, right? And so then you're listening and you're like, oh wow, like I can really see how this was an inconvenience to you. I can see how this really, um, disrupted a plan that you had, and I'm really sorry for that. I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to disrupt your plans in this way. I didn't mean to disrespect you, whatever it is. And asking, especially whenever someone is conveying how they felt, like, am I getting this right? Am I understanding what it is that you're saying? Like, Is this what you're saying? Like getting some clarity, repeating back the statements that you're hearing and getting some clarity. Am I getting that right? Does a lot for opening up the other person to, adjust maybe what it is that they're sharing or to at least hear how it is they're coming off to you so that they can, refine their statements and maybe get a little bit closer to what it is that they actually mean to convey. And what you'll have to do on your end as you're receiving this feedback from the other person is manage your own nervous system. It's probably going to feel really uncomfortable to hear another person's perspective of a way that you might have hurt them or made them not feel so good. Um, Setting your ego aside to really almost objectively, like you're listening to someone say a math formula. Oh, this was the offense, this was the action, this was the way that it made them feel. Where am I in this statement? Um, you don't have to agree with it. Again, it's not about you agreeing that, you know, eating somebody's leftover is disrespectful. Like you don't have to agree with it. That's their experience that they are having, and they're allowed to feel that way. Your job is to understand where they're coming from and allow them to have their experience. Of course, there's always a point where you can say, like, I really wasn't thinking about it that way. I didn't want the food to go bad. And there have been times before where maybe you had leftovers in there that just got left in there a little bit too long. And so I just assumed, right, whatever it was, that um, this food was going to go to waste. And so I ate it. And then now the other person understands, oh, this person didn't mean to hurt me. They were just trying not to be wasteful, right? So it could always be some simple shit like that. But having a container, again, for this question where each person is allowed to voice their perspective, that way, whenever situations do come up, no matter how small, like I said, you can talk about them in the moment and get through the conversation without a whole blow up or without someone taking it too personally or bringing in a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't relevant. That can help to lessen the frequency of passive aggressiveness in your relationship. But yeah, if there's already a lot of passive aggressiveness in the relationship, I would be prepared to honestly like have some kind of conversation, if you can, a mediated conversation of some kind where each side can air out a lot of the grievances they've been holding on to so that you can get to the original issue that kind of started all of this and that everything else piled up on top of. That way you're getting a lot of stuff off of your chest, um, feeling heard, feeling seen, feeling understood by the other person. And then starting from that space of, okay, I know that I can bring this person anything. I don't have to skirt around the topic. It's going to be hard for me to get past all of my past stuff that told me it wasn't okay to voice my feelings. But now with this person, we've created this foundation between each other where it's okay for us to do this and go from there. So it's a long process, probably really uncomfortable at first, but the more that you do it, the easier it gets. Um, and that conflict repair cycle in the relationship will actually strengthen the security of the relationship. So it'll bring you closer, make you feel more connected, and also make it feel safe for you to disagree, which in the long run just strengthens your relationship. So that's my answer. And I realize we've been on here for 82 minutes, so we can start to wrap up now. Um, any comments from you, Emilia?
As somebody who never struggles with passive aggressive anythings, um, that sounds dandy. um, um, I think that, and also as someone who does not have like, I don't have a particular affinity for like talk therapy in general, or like, I don't know, um, just that general field and adjacent things. But even with my my general feelings a lot of times of like, oh, this feels like hippie shit. This feels like, so it's just like I'm just cringing. This is corny. Um, there it makes a difference, and I'm using like I'll use you obviously, Winter, as the example. Like it makes a difference when, I've probably had like, not even counting on one hand, the number of people who would do something similar to those, like, textbook exercises type of things, um, in a real life scenario with me, um, and it actually works because that person is not a fraud, basically.
Is not
Like,
manipulating you.
is not being manipulative, is not like trying to get a specific outcome because they need like coercion from me. Like they need to exercise coercion in order to feel in control of their own selves. Like they're actually, you know, there's actually the right amount for me personally, because I'm obviously the 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 one experiencing this for myself in the long arc of my life. But for me, what feels like an appropriate balance of like we can be in relationship to each other as long as you're not trying to like absorb me into something that I didn't consent to. And that you're not trying to change me or whatever. Like that there's just a specific formula of vibes that needs to be there. And it's rare, but I'm just saying that even in the corniness, like type of prejudgment around those types of exercises, or little toolkit things, it does work when people are authentically trying to solve problems um and preserve a relationship that is fulfilling in other ways. So yeah, just pointing that out.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Can I say um break a fourth
And
wall?
it's also, well, but it's also the thing that, like, I saw this, oh, what was it? It was like a TikTok of some kind, and anyway, it was talking about, I think it was framing it about like masking, and that you become like, people who are high masking like become really good at, the emotional attunement type of things, so that um you're the one, like, really what masking is like you're the one doing this, whatever, like emotional labors, emotional regulating for the other person, to make sure that they're responding to you in a way that's regulating to their immune system, or not immune system, maybe immune system,
I
to their
mean,
nervous system. um and so when you stop doing that, um when you stop doing all this extra work to regulate their shit for them, like
right.
that's when people start to lose their minds, because like now all of
Yeah.
a sudden they're responsible for their feelings and not you.
Yep. Yep.
You're just trying to be
Talk
honest about,
about it.
so so yeah, when people just say something, I had this with a boss before. I'm never gonna forget it. Like I had a boss, one of the bosses, who was going around telling other people, telling subordinates, like in the work environment, some shit that she did not need to be saying about my personal love life, relationships. And I brought it to her. I was just like, hey, just like so calm, so just like, I'm just letting you know that I know that you said XYZ things about me, and it doesn't feel appropriate, it doesn't feel professional, it hurt my feelings. And I'm just letting you know that. And this white woman started crying and wanted me as the subordinate in this relationship to like do something for her about the fact that I'm just letting so just in terms of that, the umbrella point of, when you're just presenting people with information that is not, packaged in a way that coddles their feelings and like anticipates their emotional response, like they really need to like sit with their own shit. And it's kind
Yeah.
of, I mean, especially when it's like your boss who's, you know, doesn't
Yes.
necessarily isn't necessarily doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's actually really funny. But if it's somebody you care about, like maybe, you know, maybe the dynamic is a little bit different. Um, but but yeah, just reflecting on the fact that like it takes certain kinds of trustworthy people to like to actually enter into the kinds of exercises that will make conflict and emotional regulation inside of relationships like doable and feel like something you can actually do even if it's hard, and then it gets a little bit easier maybe. But then, you know, then you start venturing out into these other kinds of relationships and trying to do that and trying to like let people hold their own feelings and like let people like hold up a mirror to people when they realize that you're not going to do it for them. Um, that's a whole other animal.
Yeah. But I feel like that's a really good point though to bring up because I feel like what I was describing was very Libra in a sense. I mean Libra Virgo, I guess, talking about placements in the sky right now of like trying to, as objectively as possible, share your feelings, which feelings themselves are not objective. They are very much subjective, and they are something that can be felt between both people involved. And so, yeah, there's absolutely that impulse to want to manage the other person's feelings or response to whatever it is that you're saying, and vice versa. And the challenge really being very Scorpio of like, okay, whoever is sharing, whatever it is that they're sharing, if they're doing their best to share in a way that is authentic and not necessarily attacking the other person in these close relationships, you really do have to stay on your side of the street, at least at first, to manage your own feelings and let them manage their own feelings just to get through the differing perspectives part. Because you know you're the whole reason you have conflict is because you both feel differently. And especially with passive aggressiveness, like you already have withheld the truth of your feelings from the other person from some amount of time that they may not, they either may not have a clue how it is that you actually feel, or they sense that something is off but they don't know exactly what it is because you haven't been forthcoming about it, right? And I'm sharing this from the first person perspective because we can't think for other people. And so part of the issue with passive aggressiveness too, the longer it goes on, is that the person on the receiving end of it is having to guess what the actual issue is, or having to guess how you feel, or having to be more overly attuned to you and your feelings, and not really dealing with their own feelings at all. And there's a power dynamic in that, and there is some coercion and manipulation, emotional manipulation in that, a lot of people think that their partners or whoever it is should know how they feel without them having to say it, should be able to pick up on the fact that they've been acting a little bit differently, that they didn't, say I love you when they got off the phone, or they didn't give you a hug before they left, or whatever it is, they're doing this different behavior that now your partner is supposed to read into and figure out, oh, what did I do wrong? And sometimes they don't think what they did was wrong, and you have to deal with that. Like you have to deal with that conflict. Um, And I know that was something, Emilia, you and I dealt with a lot, not to bring us into it, but to bring us into it. Especially in the beginning of just like one of us doing something that the other person did not understand and feeling a way about it, but not knowing how to approach the conversation out of fear of, blowing up the whole relationship, or not being believed, or having to manage the other person's feelings, or whatever the thing was. And so, yeah, point all of that to say, like, I think the point of not managing the other person's response, or I'll say it like this to be specific. If someone comes to you with their version of a story of how you've made them feel, um, not managing how they feel, managing your own feelings, and also whenever you are telling somebody else how they've impacted you, again, not managing their feelings, but staying with yours. And as you work through the conflict, you can get to that more empathetic, co-regulated state of like, okay, we're not trying to hurt each other here. We're on the same team. Um, the issue is not the other person. The issue is this thing that happened. So when you can like decenter yourself, your trying to think of a better word than ego, but like it's like taking your
Your
perspective.
Jupiter.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're Jupiter, but I'm really thinking your sun, actually, like the way that you see yourself and the type of person that you see yourself as. And I would never do that to somebody. Like that part of you has to sit down for a second because the reality is something happened that both of you are contributing something to this
Yeah.
dynamic that the other person is responding to. So the conflict is not the other person, the conflict is the response that both of you are having. So it's like the more you can center those parts of the conflict rather than, the type of people that you think you are and this person doesn't see me and all of that, like there's room to work that stuff out after you get past what is it that we're actually disagreeing on in this moment, what is it that we're actually responding to. Let's get through that part first and then we can work on repairing, the way that you see me and all that other kind of stuff.
I mean, that's the whole reason why Scorpio is triggering to people is that, like, just because I'm telling you how I feel is not a statement about, just may or not even be anything to do with who you are and what or who you are
Right.
not. It's like I'm just telling you this thing happened and this is how I feel. Like I didn't call you and I didn't call you names.
Yeah. Which is why it's important that you don't call the other person names. And that's why it's so important how you structure your statement is that you're not attacking the other person's character. Because the minute you get into character attacks, no matter how big or small, or ways that you think, like you're thinking and feeling for other people, like, I feel like you don't love me, you don't care about me, blah, 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 like, I don't feel cared for. I don't feel seen. I don't feel understood, or, something like that. Center your side of the experience in the message that you're conveying so the other person can hear what your experience is and not feel like you're attacking them for doing something that, may or may not be the reality of the situation. Now, of course, there are all of the caveats and extremes to that, but for the most part, in someone that you're in intimate relationship with on some level, they probably didn't mean to hurt you. They're more likely responding to something in their past that you are bringing up in the present moment just by existing. And that's kind of a it's weird to consider, but you can even see it. This is why I love synastry so much. Like you can see in the people that you're attracted to whenever you pull charts, like you can usually see some kind of consistent theme or placement or sign or planet or whatever it is. And most of the time, it's going to be something that you have very little of in your own chart. And so, this other person just embodying this thing that you don't have very much familiarity or experience with in your own life, in your own chart and experience, that person is helping you cultivate within yourself by existing. But it's going to be very triggering because there's a reason why that didn't develop in a particular way for you in your life and your circumstances. So you can also see intimate relationship conflict um, as a growth opportunity for you to embody something that you haven't been able to embody before through, whatever this other person is bringing. And that's probably a reason why you were attracted to them in the first place, unconsciously. If you're the type of person who tends to avoid conflict and now you're in a relationship with somebody who wants to solve it right now, that's going to help you grow in a way. And if you're a person who wants to solve it right now and you're with someone who doesn't want to fix it right now, that's going to help you grow in a way that you weren't able to grow, to take space for yourself or to take some time to process or whatever it is. So, yeah, it gets fun.
Okay, we're done.
We're done. That's all. Um, Thanks for listening if you stayed the whole time, the whole 98 minutes, because this was all over the place. And I'm going to have to not shame Spiral about how it started out and not having a plan. So thanks for being here and for going on the journey with us. Thank you for your questions if you asked them. Thank you for your patience. And I will try to do more of these with maybe more um coherent topics or plans or something, more notice.
It was fine.
Thanks. Okay. Bye. Oh, like the video, subscribe, share it with a friend. I'm gonna figure out how to post it afterwards. And if you want to solve relationship problems with me, book a reading or a consultation. I'm gonna do free consultations soon, 15 to 30-minute consultations, because Jada was doing them and said she's had a lot of success and that I should try them out. So I'm gonna try them out. Let's do some astro coaching.